If you have ADHD and you've tried to set goals, you've probably noticed that it's not always very easy. Because I don't know about you, but I learned all kinds of different methods for setting goals when I was growing up. Actually, not really growing up, but as I got older, I worked at different businesses, learned different methods, SMART goals, all of these different kind of methodologies. And the truth was, they would work maybe a little bit, but in general, they didn't work well. And a couple years ago, I really wanted to kind of figure out why was it that sometimes things worked and sometimes did not work. And I went through this process of breaking down everything, really understanding ADHD and taking that into consideration when it comes to creating goals. So I ran this workshop called ADHD friendly goal setting with the unicorn method framework, which I'm going to discuss in this video. Now, I forgot to press start when I was recording the video. So the whole video starts when I talked a little bit about some of the front end stuff. But from the point where it picks up, you can follow along. You will learn why goal setting doesn't work typically for people with ADHD, at least the ways we learned about it. And I actually explained the unicorn framework and explained why it actually works to create goals. If you're interested on how to set goals when you have ADHD, keep watching this video. And there's a link to download the ADHD friendly goal setting checklist in the description. All right, I hope this helps. And if you didn't know, I'm Wendy. I'm the Success Doula. Enjoy the rest of it. This is the right place for you if you have overwhelm, analysis paralysis, productive procrastination, new shiny object syndrome. These are all typical symptoms of people who have an ADHD diagnosis, but you don't need to have a diagnosis to experience any of these. It actually has to do with neurobiology, why these things happen. And that is going to take us to the next slide. So in talking about goal setting, I wanted to make sure that we're reframing goal setting because as I said, we're all going to learn different things, and maybe you learned SMART goals, maybe you learned another process, maybe your parents sat down and kind of helped you develop things, maybe you had parents that were very hands off, maybe you had a teacher who helped, right? We all kind of pick up like these bits and pieces of information, but most of that information that we pick up is not designed for an ADHD brain. It's designed for neurotypical brains that do work differently. And so it's important to understand this brain wiring when you're thinking about goal setting and to keep it into consideration as you're developing your goals and setting your goals. Dopamine is the big topic around ADHD. If you don't know what it is, it's a neurotransmitter that most people who have a diagnosis have a lower amounts of dopamine flowing around in your brain. There's a new test that is out and we can start testing for this now, but prior to this new test, they haven't really been able to test for it. It's been more about understanding the behaviors that people do and how those behaviors are tied to having low dopamine. And in particular, this has a lot to do with the executive functioning. I will sometimes use these terms interchangeably because it depends on if you're talking about more psychology versus neurobiologically. If you're talking to a neuroscientist, they're going to talk about central executive network or default mode network, which are these different parts of the brain that kind of work together to perform certain tasks. Maybe when you were learning about the brain, or maybe you never have learned about the brain, or maybe you know a lot about the brain, but our brain has all these different parts, and each part doesn't do one thing in specific. Like our hand is a hand and it does things that hands do. Our eyes are eyes and it does things that eyes do. But the brain isn't set up that way, because if you think about it, the brain would have to be this like huge thing in order to accommodate all these different separate parts and behaviors. Instead, it's more like each of the brain pieces is like a letter in the alphabet, and together they create different words and create different behaviors and actions. So scientists started realizing this, and they used the term networks, brain networks, to kind of talk about the way these different letters form together to create different actions. And just like, say you have a sentence, you can interpret that sentence, or words have different meanings. Like these different networks do multiple things. They're not in charge of just one thing at a time. But when we're talking about executive functioning, we're really talking about what's called the central executive network, or the prefrontal cortex, which is the region of the brain in the front part of your brain. Sometimes I will talk about the prefrontal cortex, and really I'm just talking about executive functioning. This is what is also called the task positive network, meaning you are positively engaging in tasks, right? So your focus is on a task and you're doing it. So this is the task positive network. Then there's something called the default mode network. And this is what it sounds like, default. So this is the network that's responsible for all of our default actions. It is the least energy intensive network. It does everything basically based off of repetition, things that we've done so much that we have these strong neural connections, and we don't really actually have to use any energy, brain power to think about what it is we're doing. We can just do them automatically, aka default. This is also called the task negative network. So this is when our focus is not on doing a particular task. This default mode network is responsible for lots of cool things. It's how we're able to drive cars, how I'm able to have this conversation with you. I'm not having to recall every single word that I'm trying to say before I say it. It's how I was able to like type, send out the emails to you, all the things that we kind of do without thinking about every single little step of it. That's part of the default mode network. And one of the other components of the default mode network is it's self-referential, meaning that kind of the focus is always going to be from within you going out. And so things like daydreaming are a part of the default mode network. Certain components of imagination are in there too. So like creativity, thinking out of the box, like a lot of really cool things that we do are part of this default mode network because it's basically coming from it's self-referential coming from inside out versus the central executive network has more about like the outside, things coming in, right? And the dopamine plays a part in this. So if you have enough, I'm going to go through like a neurotypical person. Say they have a list of things to do and they see that list. That list is outside of them, right? So we're talking not self-preferential. They look at that list and they pick pick the thing on the list that they think is the most important. And then their attention gets focused into it. And this is because they have enough dopamine going on where they're able to switch from that self-referential system, that default mode network, over into the central executive network, basically task negative to task positive. Hey, I'm done thinking about things from my inside perspective. I'm now going to switch to this outside perspective and do the tasks in front of me. This process is seamless for someone who's got enough dopamine going on in their brain. When you do not have enough dopamine, this process is like trying to switch into that process is the equivalent of telling someone whose legs are broken to just get up and walk. It doesn't work. And it is unfortunate that most goal setting and most productivity techniques really kind of still go around this idea that if you can think something, you'll do it. And that is just not the way it actually works when you look into like how dopamine plays into goal setting. So so let me sure I got right? So I talked about default mode network and I talked about the central executive network and then talking about how the motivation to do this goal is linked to that. So it's about switching from that self-referential state to an outside state. Now, a lot of us do get motivation from an outside state. So we call this external motivation, such as deadlines or disappointing people or something where it kind of takes that self-referential part that we're kind of stuck in when you have ADHD and that external part kind of come together and they kind of play and that creates the motivation. It's still a pretty self-referential motivation, right? Like a deadline, I'm going to get fired or I'm going to fail a class or I'm going to get in trouble with my boss or disappointing someone else. It's still that self-referential part of I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to disappoint people. All those things are still kind of coming from that default mode network. And it's not truly that shift into that task positive until that external part becomes so overwhelming that your brain then actually shifts into that task positive network. And unfortunately, that's most people with ADHD learned how to get things done by getting it to that, like kind of that forced shift over into the central executive network through so much external pressure that you had no choice but to kind of shift into there. And so this means that a lot of times people with ADHD, you know, kind of struggle with planning, organization, prioritization because their brain is still over in that separate self-referential part. They're really good at like vision planning, future, like thinking about the future, thinking about the way things could be, because that's coming from that default mode network. All right. Um, so this lipid not star model for managing complex change, I know that's a mouthful. This is something that if you go into business planning, you may learn a little bit about. It's been around since the 80s. There's a lot of information about this and why it works and why it doesn't work. Now, this concept is talked a lot about like in big businesses, and they use this model for change and trying to create the steps whenever there's going to, like, if say there's going to be a takeover or merging of a company, usually you'll have the admin people or like the people on the team coming in, and they're really going to address each component of this change model in order to make sure that the shifts, these big changes, can happen within these organizations. Now, unless you've been doing MBA level work learning about this, chances are you don't understand these different components of it. And most of the language around that is very business centered. And so that's why I created the unicorn framework. It basically is taking these things into consideration. If you have all of those in place, then you have a successful change. If you think about a goal, what's a goal? You're trying to do something, create a change, like there's some sort of change that's related to that goal. Otherwise, it would just be the same and it wouldn't be a goal and you'd just be doing whatever it is you're doing. So all goals that are attained have these pieces in play. Say, for example, you're planning a vacation. You've got a vision of where to go, the skills, you know how to book book all the things ready for the vacation, incentives. You want that break. You want to go have fun. The resources. You see if you've got the money, like, babysitters, whatever your situation is. Consensus. That's basically, is everyone on board with the plan? When it's just you, if you're completely on board with it, yep, I want that vacation. Yep, I've got the money. Like, you don't have anything holding you back. You've got the consensus. And then the action plan is actually taking the steps to plan the vacation. You can see how all those pieces are in play. If one of those pieces is not a part of it, that vacation is never happening, right? So, sometimes people say, oh, I want to go to Egypt someday. That means there's probably some consensus. They haven't developed an action plan. Maybe the incentives are there. Maybe the resources are there. Maybe the skills are there. The vision's there. But something's missing still in that piece, why they haven't actually taken the steps to, go visit Egypt or wherever vacation. But you can, if all the steps are there, they start planning it and then they go and take the vacation. So this is foundational to understanding actually goal setting. So this is where I put this whole thing together, is basically taking all of those pieces that are required for change, but putting them more into language that's easier to understand and is more, at least in my opinion, more accessible to daily living. So like if you're trying to create a goal to do things, planning a vacation, planning a acquisition of a company, those are a little more explanatory. But when you start getting into the kind of nitty gritty where things aren't so defined and so easily distinguished, this is where this framework is. So first, unapologetic authenticity. So I have a bunch of things that I, promote about developing your unapologetic authenticity. And basically, this is about really tapping into who you are, what you want, why you want it, like not making apologies and trying to make excuses, not doing something because you should be doing it because someone else should be doing it that way, but like, what do you actually really, really want? If you registered, you probably got the email about the keystones. So keystones are a big part of this. Like getting clear on your big vision is a big part of this. They're not always necessary for goal setting, but they definitely make goal setting so much easier. And that's why they're going to be on the checklist that we're going to be going through. Because when you have that part of you defined, then you're not, this kind of helps with that consensus, the vision part and the consensus part. You really get on board with why you're doing what you're doing. So if someone's telling you you should post on social media 4 days a week, but something in you is fighting it, or you don't want to. Maybe it's because, like with me, posting 4 days a week means I have to spend XYZ amount of time that I'm not able to spend with my kids then, right? Or I'm not able to do something else in my business that I actually really want to do. So I will put off doing the social media because I really don't have consensus with this belief that I should be posting 4 times a week on social media, because it's not truly aligned with who I am authentically, right? Um, so that's one piece of it. Neuro reprogramming, mindset. We hear it all the time. Mindset, mindset, mindset. This also has to do with that consensus part. If your mind is not aligned with what you're doing, just what I was talking about right now, if I value spending time with my kids and not, you know, spending extra hours on the weekend, working instead of being with my kids, I'm not going to take that action to do those extra steps that are needed to get the work done on the weekend, because I'm not going to have that same mindset. But if I, you know, decide like I really want to get this work done on the weekend because right now it's important for my bigger vision to do things, then I still may need to shift some other thoughts about why I've been fighting showing up on social media. There might be some other things there. Maybe I'm scared to be seen. Maybe, I'm worried like people will see me as an imposter. Maybe I don't feel like I've got enough certificates or degrees, or, whatever the situation is. There's all these different things that kind of come into play. And when you're talking about goals, a lot of times our goals are the things that we think we should be doing. And maybe we really want to. Maybe they really are aligned with our bigger vision, but there's something holding us back. So we do kind of need to look at that neuro reprogramming part, that mindset part, when we're looking at our goals, and be honest about where we are with our goals. Because otherwise, if you were neurotypical, you would be able to just look at the list of your goals, switch over into that task positive and do them, whether or not you were intrinsically motivated to do them. But when you do not have enough dopamine, if you do not have that intrinsic motivation to get the things done, you're not going to be able to look at your list and do the things that you want to do. And this leads us into incentives, right? So trying to stay away from those external pressures that maybe kind of create like a negative, impact on us. Like this, like, do you really want to wait to the deadline of, wait to the point where you feel like you're disappointing clients before you get your work done? Or do you want to actually take action, in the beginning, support yourself as you're developing, the different things and working on your goals? That is where, kind of having that incentives is going to come in here. I really like having kind, caring, compassionate, and accountability to complete my goals. I do that like within Unstuckable program. But as you kind of really look at what your incentives that you've been working off of, like what really incentivizes you to get your shit done. If you're completely dependent on external motivation for that, you might want to look at, and if you've tried everything else, like you've done the neuro reprogram, you've done all these other things, you want to look at how you can like build that into achieving your goals. Because if you need accountability, if you haven't developed that intrinsic motivation and you're still depending on external motivation, you're going to have some other incentive in there to be able to have your goals. And then capacity management. So this is, our skills, our time. So time blindness is going to be a part of this with ADHD. Some people struggle with it more than others when you have ADHD. I particularly, when I get in flow, hours can disappear. Yesterday, I felt so bad. I didn't see the text coming through with my son. It wasn't until he called when I was already a half an hour late to pick him up, and I hadn't left yet because I was in such a deep state of flow, and I didn't set a timer to go pick him up, right? And I just completely lose all track of time when I get into that flow. Or conversely, there's times when I am doing like productive procrastination stuff and I'm just not noticing the time. And now there's no time left. And now I have to like rush through and get my things done. Being aware of that time management for yourself is going to be important in there when you're looking at your goals, right? Like, do you need breaks? Like sometimes we also just need support from ourselves, from other people. Can you do back-to-back sessions with clients, or do you need breaks in between there, right? Can you do back-to-back sessions with clients, just take a quick lunch break and now start working 4 hours on another project? Maybe, maybe not. I would say most people can't do that. So really kind of looking at like what is your actual capacity is going to be an important part also when you're creating your goals. And then objectives, like get clear on what your outcome is. It really helps develop that intrinsic motivation. Like you have that bigger vision, unapologetic authenticity about who you are, why you're doing the things that you're doing, but then really thinking about the objectives for each of the goals that you're setting helps you get a little bit clearer. And it also gives you that motivation to do something. You know, when you've got a vacation planned and you've got to get your work done before your vacation, people get their work done before their vacation because they're excited about going on that vacation. The objective of the vacation is really super clear. It's not always so clear when the thing we're trying to get done is like the same thing we're going to have to get done in another month and another month, another month. But when your objectives are clear about why you're doing it, not just the bigger picture, but even for that one thing, it makes it easier to understand why you're doing it. Like, I know why I need to do laundry. I like wearing clean clothes, right? My objectives on putting the laundry away once it's clean, those are not as clear in my mind. But the cleaning of the clothes, that I've got pretty good objectives on, right? And then resources, you got to get honest about your resources, like what tools you use, your people, the systems, the processes, all of that stuff that are going to be required to do your goals. And then last but not least, nervous system regulation. You've got ADHD, you've got low dopamine, you're going to be stressed. That's what happens because you are working extra hard to shift from task negative into task positive compared to other people. Regulating your nervous system will help boost and increase your dopamine, which will make it easier then to do your tasks. There's lots of different ways to do this. So there you go. All right. I think that was it. So now let's just take a moment, breathe. And then I'm going to kind of run through the checklist real quick. And then here we go. So here is the goal setting checklist. Did I do that right? Okay, there we go. Where's the interact? There we go. All right. So if you can see this here, it kind of breaks down all of those components of the unapologetic of the unicorn framework. So I have unapologetic authenticity, talk about your keystones. When you write out your goal, writing out your keystones and like reviewing them, kind of stopping to think about like, how does this, is this like actually something I really want to do? Like, is this aligned with who I am, like what I'm trying to do? It's really easy to make that list of all the things that should get done and then, assume that because you wrote that list of everything that should get done, that everything on that list is aligned. Unless you've actually stopped to take a couple moments to really look at like, is this actually aligned with what I'm trying to create? Uh, it's going to be an important. So we've got the goal, looking through I can't even speak. The keystones, and then I can't see this. That's why I'm struggling. My screen is too small. And then we have like, does it align with your big vision? And then maybe you just need to rewrite your goal, right? Because sometimes the way we write our goals, it doesn't actually align. But if then go through and look in if you need to rewrite it. And then talking about the neuro reprogramming, I am a big fan of creating an affirmation when you're working on a big goal. Now, if you're talking about like just like little task to-do list, this isn't necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the bigger goals that you're trying to work on, usually multiple steps. Um, if you haven't done it already, if you're finding it difficult to do something, there's a mindset issue there because kind of like that vacation example, when it's aligned, you do all the things. Like you make the plans, you collect your resources, you do the action plan, you figure out, you figure it out because you're aligned. Like you've got that consensus within your mind. You've got that mindset of, yes, I'm going to take this vacation. And as long as the resources are there, you do it. There isn't any friction there. And there's lots of things that we do where there's no friction. If there's friction, if you're struggling with something, there is something off in your mind that is preventing you from doing. Because when that is in place, now provided the rest of the pieces are there. If you go through this, you do your goal and everything seems there, it's aligned with your big vision, all the other parts of the unicorn part, right? Then neuroprogram is going to be there. I like doing this kind of at the beginning, write out the affirmation that I would believe if I was going to work on this goal, achieve this goal, something related to that goal. And then I go through that purposeful affirmation worksheet that I have and see if there is anything there, right? And in doing that, you get more grounded in the goal that you're doing, and it gives you even more motivation because you're like, yeah, this is aligned with what I want to do. This is part of my bigger vision. This is like, I am feeling this so good. And then there's space right here to rewrite that affirmation if you want to. And then incentives. So determine your why, like what's the impact or motivation for this goal, and then set up accountability to do it, right? If you find that you have a goal there and your typical motivation that you use is like waiting for the deadline, then be honest about that with yourself. Like, how are you going to get the things done for your goal and create that motivation with deadlines? I know for me and a lot of people that I work with, if there isn't an external person putting pressure on me and I just create an arbitrary deadline, I very rarely actually meet that arbitrary deadline because it's arbitrary, right? There really isn't pressure. I'm just using a technique that I've used in the past, which is to have a deadline to like give me that motivation. But it was never the deadline that was the motivation. It was that whole external pressure of disappointing the people and losing, getting a bad grade, which also may be disappointing your parents or disappointing your boss or, whatever the situation is. It's actually, that was always the motivation. And when that's not actually there and you're like what we do it to ourselves all the time, we're like beat ourselves up, but it really doesn't have that same motivation because all we're doing is being mean to ourselves. We're not actually creating external motivation. We're just being mean when we're creating a deadline that isn't, to do something that isn't aligned with ourselves, right? Like when we're not being honest about how we actually get up and do things, right? And then capacity management. So I love using an ideal weekly schedule. Actually, two things: ideal weekly schedule, like how you would like everything to work, and then like a minimal weekly schedule, like what's the minimum that you will do every day on a general basis for the week. Just work on getting that minimal schedule. Make sure that you're hitting all those things that you're like, yep, I'm going to make sure that I don't miss a client meeting and that I exercise twice a week. And, I, maybe one other thing or something, right? And if those are on my list, and I do those things, I still feel good because I hit my minimum schedule. Ideal weekly schedule is like when everything just like works the way it's supposed to do. There's no like having to go to the doctor's office with the kids or having an emergency meeting, with a client or a friend who's calling you because they really need your help or whatever the situation is that distracts us from our week and getting things done. You have that and you try to follow that, but that's like your ideal. Doesn't mean it's going to happen every week. It just means like ideally, this is the way your week looks and it helps you stay on track. And then big fan of quarterly planning where you really know what you're doing each week to attain those goals, right? So you've got your goals and now let's like plan it out. Make sure you know all the different steps that you're going to be doing to get those goals done. And then actually take the time to fill in your calendar or your Notion, Asana, or whatever you use to keep track of, what you're doing. Get those into your system, right? Because if they're not in your system, there's more of a chance that you're not going to do them. But if you've got a system where like, especially like a checkbox where like you like seeing those checkbox at the end of the week. And if you're in like Unstuckable and come back every week and be like, yeah, I got this done and this done and this done and this done. It's so much nicer to be able to see all the things that you actually got done because we have a tendency to focus on all the things we don't do and we don't really notice all the things that we do. And then objectives, right? Um, this is a little bit tied into the incentives. So like your why and your motivation. Like when I was talking about motivation and your why, like why do you do the things you do and motivation that you do? Your objectives are really kind of like thinking about like, okay, what's the real purpose? Like how is this tied to my big vision? Or how is this tied to living in my keystone? Like how is this tied into helping me be unapologetically authentic, right? Like if no one else is around, would you have the same goal? Like, is this something that's tied to like your bigger purpose? And then how will accomplishing this goal impact or help others? I find a lot of times it's easier to do things like post on social media when you don't want to, when you realize like, wait, I have to tell people about how I help them. They're never going to know how I help them if I don't tell them. So if I don't post on social media, I do people a disservice by not telling them that I actually have the answer to the thing they're struggling with, right? And so it's important to really kind of be honest, like look at these objectives because it's also much easier than to do the social media post for me. Like if I know like, oh, I'm doing the social media post because I know someone's going to read this and it's going to help them versus, oh, I don't really want to do this, right? Like it's two totally different stories. And, that plays in a little bit more with most of us with ADHD, where we rely on external motivation. Having a positive impactful external motivation is a lot better for your nervous system regulation than having like you're going to get in trouble motivation, right? So it actually will start help as you focus more on like creating impact and making a difference in the world with whatever it is you're doing, even if it's a personal thing that you're doing, it goes out, right? Like if you're working on, you know, being healthy, right? And exercising and eating well. And you know that your friends are watching you and they're struggling with it. Like when they see you do it, when they see you actually take the steps, your friends may actually take the steps, right? Or your family may do some of the things that they see you doing. So even if it's an internal thing, like something that you're trying to do for yourself, think about also the impact that it has when other people see you doing that. Um, and it can also can help you give that motivation because now it's like, yeah, I get to like show up as the person that I know I want to be, and then identify the emotional purpose behind your goal. Like, how will it make you feel when you actually achieve it? Like, are you going to be like, oh, it's just one more thing I did? Are you going to feel really good about it? Is it going to now open up the door to the next thing that you're really excited to work on? Like, there's going to be some emotions that are tied, and getting clear on how you're going to feel about it can also help give you that true like objective, that intrinsic motivation to be able to do the things that you want to do. And then last but not least, look at the resources that are needed, or this isn't last, resources that are needed, like the tools. Like, do you have the systems in place? Do you have the processes in place? Do you have the support people in place? I mean, those are real. Like if you want to do um like where you meal prepping, but you don't have any containers, you don't have any recipes, right? Like you're going to need some resources to do the meal prepping. Now, if you've been doing meal prepping forever, it's probably not on your goal list because it's now like a habit, right? So a lot of times when we're doing things, we will stopping to look at like, okay, what are the resources I need to actually get this stuff done? And then, maybe ADHD business coach, like Unstuckable is one of your resources and be able to help you. Like maybe you need some resources in figuring out your incentives or your capacity management or any of those other things. Like what are those resources that you need to actually get these things done? And then last but not least, nervous system regulation. Take a few minutes to think about like as you're doing, like all the goals are going to be different, right? So like if your goal is about creating an exercise routine, it's going to be very different than creating a social media plan, right? Think about what you're going to need like on the physical realm, like to support you. Are you going to need breaks? Are you going to need sleep? Are you going to need to eat well? Like, right? All of those things, emotional, like what's going to come up? Like, is this something that's going to be really emotional for you as you're doing it? Or is it something that you find yourself procrastinating on and then you beat yourself up over? And then the mental part, kind of like what I talked about before, that mindset, really think about like, what can you do to, shift that mindset. If you start noticing there is procrastination on there, or you're getting overwhelmed, there's going to be some mindset work that you're going to need to do there. And then spiritual, connecting into that inner wisdom part. A lot of times we just don't take the time and space to get still and quiet, even for 5 minutes. We say, oh, I don't have time to meditate for an hour or 20 minutes. But when sometimes we just need 2 minutes to stop and be quiet with ourselves. And then social, every human needs to be social. If you do not have a good, strong social community, if you're working on a goal where you don't have other people around that are doing the same things, it can feel very isolating, because you don't have a way to like talk and have feedback on those different things that you're doing. I put on here too a resource for regulating your nervous system, which is my program, Microdosing with the Moon. It is designed to help support people uh, really work. It's really more like moon with microdosing and maybe microdosing. So you don't actually have to be microdosing. So a lot of times people know microdosing for psychedelics, but maybe it's about incorporating a natural botanical like kava into your system. But really it's about working with the moon. We spend the each Thursday doing some kind of nervous system regulation, kind of getting good with our mind. It helps with that mindset. It helps with emotional processing. Helps a lot with this. And when you're with other people, so there's social. We have time to connect to your inner wisdom. And physical, we're really looking at what's happening with the moon and what's impacting you physically. So the microdosing with the moon kind of is a program that does kind of address all those pieces. It's not the only one out there. So yeah, okay, that was a lot. Hopefully you found this ADHD friendly goal setting worksheet and framework helpful. If you're interested about downloading it, as I said, link in the description. And I also have 2 other free things called the Keystones and the Big Vision Blueprint. If you are a solo entrepreneur with ADHD, the Big Vision Blueprint is designed to help you discover and create a path for building your business when you have ADHD. Like everything I do, everything is made for people with ADHD, but you don't have to have ADHD in order for these solutions to work for you. Hope you found this useful, and hopefully we'll see you around again.